Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk.
Hello and Happy New Year, Dr. Rapici. How are you doing?
Happy New Year, Barry. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing fine. Happy New Year to our followers on podcasts, followers of this podcast. We're back again in the new year, 2024. To I guess in a way we're continuing the new thread of the new season, and we're thinking about technology and its relation to affect. We're thinking about technology and the ways it the ways it correlates or relates to emotion, affects, relationships. We just finished talking about Kazuo Ishiguro's Clara and the Sun. And we talked about the representation of an artificial friend in that book, and what that representation, or what Ishiguro was trying to tell us about the possibilities of robots being our AFs, our artificial friends, and the ways in which robots and technology in general is sort of rewiring, to keep the metaphor going, our emotional life. And I guess we're in the same, even though we're not going to be talking about Kazuo Ishiguro, we're kind of in that same groove thing again. Do you want to mention who we're reading, and then I'll start us off and talk about a couple of things.
So we are today going to be talking about Sherry Turkle's book, Alone Together. And this was 2011. Ms. Turkle has written, or she is from MIT, and writes really a lot about the interaction of technology and our, I don't know how you would say, like our lived experience, the effects that technologies have on us, and the ways that we engage interpersonally
great
with I guess with technological interfaces. And we chose this largely because it is older at this point. When this was 2011.
11.
And so, at this point we have the smartphone, but we still have MySpace. So social media is a thing, but it's still a nascent thing that's sort of finding its feet. She's concerned with things like Second Life was something that she wrote about. Right. So the technologies are different, and in some ways, which is funny, if it's 13 years ago, but in some ways, a lot of this stuff sort of feels almost antiquated, but at the same time, I think it's still certainly the beauty of reading this, I think, is that we get to look at what a smart take on the effects of these technologies on our interpersonal worlds and interactions was.
10 years ago more.
13 years
and now,
ago.
13 years ago now. I can't do math. I'm an English major.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we can look at a smart take on technology, what it looked like then. And we can, and I think that's what we're going to be doing in this episode. We'll be thinking about what has been the progress or development or evolution of technology and its relation to human emotion and human relationships in subsequent years as well. So we'll be looking back, and also no doubt returning to dipping our feet and thinking about, not dipping our feet, let's get rid of that. We'll be thinking about the present conditions in terms of, I guess, the technological human interface. That's probably the best way to put it. Can I add something about Turkle?
Absolutely.
Before we continue, you mentioned her bio. So I was reading a little bit about her, and she talks about this a little bit in the book. It's interesting that, well, first off, this idea of how interacting with technology, in particular, interacting with computers, and then later on, I guess, in her career, AI, forms of artificial intelligence. That's her specific area. That's her specific research area. But what also interested me is that she has and not just psychological training, but psychoanalytic training.
Hmm.
And in particular, she's interested in the theories, though he's, kind of in an odd relationship to Freudian psychoanalysis, but another interest of her intellectual interest from her, or part of her intellectual background, is the psychologist Jean Piaget.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that Piaget brings to the psychological table, to psychological study, is this idea that um, as we interact in our infancy with objects in the world, it's inflected by, I was about to say a friend of the program, but we'll end up in the dark web, Martin Heidegger. But
Right.
uh, so I won't call him a friend of the program, but you know what I mean. But it's inflected by Heidegger in the sense that um, Piaget believed that, of course, it's kind of a merger of Freud and Heidegger, in that human relationships with objects in the world is kind of crucial for constituting human subjectivity. And the Freudian bit of that, of course, is that those object relations that we have in our infancy are, they're crucial in terms of our mental development. And this is interesting. Now, fast forward here. So thinking about what Turkle's done, it's just interesting to think of where she was and where she went to, or where she's been and where she's going. Um, so basically, she's trying to answer the question of how has human psychology changed? Because uh, she's she's asking at least two different and really interesting research questions. The first one would be something like this: how has human psychology changed now that the mass of the human race, a lot of people in the human race, are interacting in a daily level with objects, with intelligent objects, with the computer, with things like that? And then, of course, the second question that you can imagine, intrigues her and interests her, and it explains why so much of her ethnography in the book has to do with children, is that she agrees, and she senses, and I'm sure is proven in her studies, that children who grow up with sentient objects in their lives are going to have a different kind of mental capacity, emotional world, affective life than adults who encounter these sentient objects. So I just wanted to add this kind of flavor. I think it's an interesting flavor in Turkle's writing, where her intellectual background and how she came to this particular topic, I think is just sort of interesting. I hope it's somewhat interesting to our listeners. Anyway, as a
I,
sort of frame for where we're going.
yeah, no, I think so. And I got to say, just as a sort of I'm a huge fan of this woman. Everything she writes is just so interesting.
You know what, Michael? You know what that reveals about you, though?
Probably something. What?
I think that reveals about you. I mean, because I think this is really, really
It's kind of
uh
terrifying.
no. This is not a dig, and this is just I think she's a kind of tender-hearted writer. You're a kind of tender-hearted guy. I could say this on Zoom. This is not so. This is we're
I think that's what people think when they think of me. They think there is a
yeah.
tender-hearted guy.
I mean, she's humanistic, a thinker. She's concerned with empathy, and she herself is really shows a lot of empathy to her subjects and her
Well, I
inquiries. And
think.
so I
Thank
think
you.
that's what you respond to her.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. I
Yeah,
think that's an interesting point of entry for us, to be honest with you,
let's
because
do it.
one
Let's enter this text here. I
one
didn't
of
mean
her
to go so long.
concerns, right,
Yeah.
is about sort of what the value of empathy or just emotional
Mhm,
available, like what constitutes legitimate emotional,
mhm.
a legitimate emotion, and what the real value of that is in practice. So, um, yeah, I think let's jump in both feet.
Well, what you just said, I mean, I think we've already commenced, because what you just said strikes me. You just described kind of a central pattern in the book. There's a lot of her, I mean, she does research. We hear a lot of narrative cases, and that's what constitutes the stuff in this book. She talks about her findings, and she tells case histories, right? That's a good description. And it seems that a lot of the case histories we read, full disclosure, we didn't read all the book, but we were kind of cherry picking. But I think in what we read, there seemed to be a kind of constant, there seemed to be a narrative, and I'm going to try to describe a narrative, and you tell me if I'm describing it right, Michael. There's a kind of narrative where she is asking, as you said, this question about how we emotionally interact. What's our emotional interaction with technology? And it seems like there's this kind of repeating narrative structure in the book. Warm-hearted, empathetic Sherry Turkle will be thinking, well, robots, they're cool. But they're a supplement. They're a substitute or a supplement or some subsidiary work, secondary to the human. They're an artificial friend can only be a substitute for a human friend. That's all they can be. And when I say there's a narrative structure, it seems like there's always someone, usually in robotics, who's pushing back against this kind of common sense view, saying, what are you saying? Why are you assuming that robots aren't on the equal level with a human? What do you mean that robots or that robots can't feel? What do you mean that the human emotion with a robot is somehow subsidiary or secondary or derivative of a more primary affection that humans feel for other humans? You have to rethink your conception. So that's what I mean by narrative structure. She's always sort of going into these stories and going into these cases and thinking that the technology will always be a supplement or substitute, and then somebody pushes back.
Yeah, I think maybe it's probably, we're probably late to do this, but I think it's important to sort of identify the central argument here, as I understand it, right? So she's called the book Alone Together. And the argument, as I understand it, is that with the advent and proliferation of networked devices, cell phones, computers,
Right.
et cetera, we are now more than at any other point in time connected. But her argument is that the more heavily connected, the more mediated these connections are, perversely, the more isolated we become.
Right.
That the promise of increased productivity, increased access, increased ability, the increases that digital technologies afford us, promise, all sorts of things, but the dark side of this, as she sees it, is a dark side. And this is where that, I think, the emotive aspect of robotics comes in, is that we don't, it's almost like because we have so many possibilities for connection, we instinctively seek to shield ourselves from the access that others have to us, thereby creating this sort of emotional vacuum. And then the question is, how do we address that vacuum? How do we cope? And so the term that kept coming to my mind as I was reading this was the pharmacon, right? Like, because what she's seeing is that for all the promise that technology offers, we become increasingly alienated. And the answer to how do we address that alienation, how do we soothe that loneliness, is more technology, right? Because, well, we can create a robot for you, and we can create a robot that more accurately mimics appropriate emotional responses, or that is present when, that is a physical presence when you can't be, but it is an animated physical presence. So it's like the one of the things that she said that I think was interesting was, like, these technologies really shine a light on how much we're willing to allow ourselves to believe. How I think this is a fair paraphrase. These are my take, not hers. That how much are we willing to allow ourselves to believe in terms of the emotional availability of an algorithm? Is that fair?
Yeah, except I'm a little confused. It sounds fair, but I was a little confused by what you mean by believe.
Well, so one of the central
How much
arguments that
credence we're willing to give to technology? Is that what you mean?
well, I think there's a tension, and this is back to the emotional aspect of technology here. She's steadfast, right? That there is no such thing as an emotionally as an emotional machine. Robots can't have emotions. But they do a very convincing job of enacting emotional responses that are increasingly appropriate. And so the question then becomes not, is this robotic friend of mine, is my Clara really emotionally available to me? The question becomes, how much am I willing to let myself believe that this is authentic? So to me, one of the big tensions here is really between mimicry, algorithmic mimicry, and
I see.
authenticity. And I think one of the questions that comes to the fore then is like, what's the value of authenticity? Because she repeatedly argues
Right.
that good enough is better than nothing. And one of the things that struck me about this, and this is one of the
Good
things,
enough is better than. Let's pin that down for me and for the listener about how that what you just said, because I think that's the right phrase. But let's make it clear to everyone what you mean. Good enough is it. What was your phrase? Good enough
is
is
better than nothing.
better than
So
nothing. Now, in this case, good enough is the technological
yeah, so
companion.
if you'll allow me to use, because I think it works well for my purposes, for my illustration
Okay.
here. I'm going to
Okay.
use the example of Clara from Clara and the Sun. So if you
Okay.
didn't listen to the episodes, there's a little girl named Josie who gets a robotic companion, an artificial friend named Clara, to be her best friend, right? And Turkle would look at this and say, well, the argument here is that Clara is not real. She's not emotionally available, but she's better than total alienation or
Okay.
total
Yeah.
loneliness.
Yeah.
So it's better than nothing. But I think the other seductive aspect of this, and this gets back to the sort of the lie that we tell ourselves, or not even if it's not necessarily a lie, how much we're willing to allow ourselves to believe. One of the things that's fascinating about all of this artificial intelligence and all of these robotics that Turkle's talking about is that they are all algorithmically driven, right? This is all under the covers mathematics. It's ones and zeros. And I think that we have an implicit belief or faith in the perfectibility of mathematics, right? And this drove a lot of the plot in Clara and the Sun, right? That the artificial friends make better decisions. That AI gets it right. And if it's not getting it, if it doesn't currently get it right, it will get it right. That it will be better. And so I think that part of this, there's a seduction with the belief that the mathematics that underpins this, even though it's not emotionally authentic, because it's mathematically driven, it must have the potential for perfection. And I think that that potential for perfection is a really effective addition to good enough, with the idea that, well, maybe my robot isn't human, but it's
But
better
it
than
might
being
be. It might
alone.
strive
But
to
it
be. Yeah.
also won't screw up in the ways that humans will. It won't do these things that are outside of whatever acceptable parameters have been set. And I think that we just place an implicit faith in that enables us to buy in.
And I would say that's very, very dangerous.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, I would say that's very, very dangerous because why do I think it's very, very dangerous? Um,
Because the algorithm's entirely external to us. I think
well,
that's the reason
right,
why.
right. Well, right, but I also see another danger there. Let me see if I can try to articulate it. Uh, and we were talking a little. I'll bring this in here. Something that Michael and I were talking about ahead of time. I was sort of comparing in our pre-game chat. We were talking. I brought up Marshall McLuhan, another friend of the program.
Absolutely, St. Marshall.
And and we were and Michael and I had talked about the medium is the mass age a couple of weeks ago. And McLuhan, I mean, a lot of complex and interesting ideas in that book, but the core idea, at least I think McLuhan is always repeating this idea, and I think he thinks it's as much of the core idea as the medium is the message. Um, the primary idea of McLuhan's brand of media studies is that technology has changed and evolved, but it always evolves according to a sort of with an organic purpose. The purpose of technology kind of stays the same. And the purpose is to act as an extension to the physical body. And that's so not just to as an so that our technology is an extension of the human. And for McLuhan, in a very literal way, in that it's an extension of the human body. So that all are in one of the most interesting, literally eye-catching sections in the medium is the mass age. Is that section where we have the toe and the tire and the eye and things like this, and we're told that technology is always human scale. So getting back to, so why do I think there are a lot of warning signs, not in Turkle herself, although I do want to offer a little bit of a criticism of Turkle, one of her arguments that you just drawn on, if I can remember it after I finish this thought. But this seems to be an important point to make. There are a lot of danger signs, not in Turkle herself, but in the stories that she tells, and in the historical social situation that she describes, which is our situation 10 years, 15 years back, but still recognizably our situation, the particular way we relate to the internet and to computer technologies and now to AI, is that and it deals directly with what you were saying, this idea of perfectibility. So gone is the McLuhan idea that technology is an extension of the human, quite literally an extension of our bodies. More and more, when we talk about technology, we're imagining technologies that will replace the human. And I won't even go to AI. I won't even go to Clara and the Sun. I'll just talk about the internet, because this is, as you mentioned, one of the primary examples. This is many of the examples that she gives in the book. It's just the homely example, and to us, the very familiar example of someone who is, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there was an English gentleman that one of the case studies where he was saying, I go home, I'm out on a holiday, I go in my room, I'm on my computer 10 hours a day. I have to go out and have dinner with my family. Mm-hmm. That sucks. Mm-hmm. And so, in a way, the internet, you don't need AI. You don't need the bells and whistles. All you need is this idea of a connection. But the internet isn't just an extension of the human in the way that McLuhan was talking about. The internet is the internet and the artificial companionship of the network that is afforded by the internet is more and more understood as a superior substitute, not just a substitute even, but a superior substitute, one that's more fitted to my needs, so in a sense more user friendly, to use the own term, right? So that strikes me as a danger, is that we're talking in fact, we're not. I think there is actually a double whammy that's going on here. It's not that just we're no longer talking in Turkle's world, it's not just that we're no longer talking about technology as an extension. We're also not even talking about technology as a substitute, where most of the times, and I'm not even, like I said, I'm not even getting to AI. But most of the times, the valences in which, in the context when we talk about technology, we're no longer in the McLuhan-esque world of it's an extension of the human or it's an amplification of the human. It's an improvement on the human. In particular, it's an improvement on the family.
I have a question for you about that, though, because it's interesting here. When you say that the technology becomes a superior substitute,
Yeah.
I want to know how do you want superior in what way? Because my read of this isn't that it's a better family. It is
So,
simply a more manageable, controllable So the idea
agreed.
that it's still, in a way, I read this as being, well, it's good enough, but it is good enough all the time, which makes it
Right.
superior.
Right. Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Let me clarify. Uh, no, I don't mean superior in any ontological sense or any
Mhm.
value sense. What I'm saying is for the person who prefers staying in the chat room to having dinner with their family, it's not that and certainly Turkle isn't implying that that's a superior relationship to the family relationship, but it is a superior. I use superior in a very, very limited sense, and that is the sense that we prefer.
So let me ask you a question about this. I'm curious as to your answer here, because for me, one of the really fascinating tensions that came out of this was between our perceptions of authenticity, or was around our perceptions of authenticity. And to me, this gets at that question, right? Where,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
she like I thought about, for example, she wrote a different article. I can't recall the name of it. We read this in one of my classes where you talk about sort of what was her term for it? It was about dating and dating apps and interactions and how this is much more recent than this book, but how we're able to it's like stress-free dating interaction. Like you can
Right,
interact
right,
with
right,
somebody
right,
without
right,
their knowledge if you want to
right,
swipe
right,
one way and disregard them. So the
right,
human, and I put human in quotes here, interactions are now fully disposable, right?
right,
Like the authentic nature of the discussions you're going to have. So you think
right,
back to 2010,
right.
you go back even a few years before, she had talked about chat rooms in AOL, for example. There was the big question when I remember when this was a thing where people would, quite literally get on and pretend to be somebody they weren't.
Sure, sure,
And so you'd
sure.
have this deep emotive interaction with somebody who you thought was one thing and they're something very, very, very removed from
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
It's like we're willing to do that and not care. So what's the value of authenticity here? Like, that's
Yeah.
it. Is there one? Like, do we
Uh,
care if because there's so much just dialogue in the world and rhetoric about whether something's real or fake or authentic. But it seems like when you push comes to shove, we don't really care.
I think, well, first off, I think you answered your own question. I do think, and I think Turkle's evidence, her case studies kind of show this, that over and over again, either Turkle or the persons around her that she's interviewing, or the stories she recounts, they invoke authenticity, but then they basically say, "I'll settle, I'll settle, I'll
But do
use."
you do
That's what
you
I meant by,
think?
yeah.
I think from Turkle's position, if she's and I
Uh-huh.
so I did something similar to this recently with my students, and I asked them a question. I just asked them. I said,
Hmm.
I was struggling with the fact that a lot of my students spent the majority of their time in class with their faces in their phones.
Hmm.
And then they'd submit work that was just very far afield from what it was supposed to be. Not
Hmm.
because they're not capable of doing the work, but because they simply weren't present. They weren't attentive to what was going on. And so
Hmm.
they're not responding appropriately, we'll say. And so,
Hmm.
we read this article, this other article on Turkle. The name of it escapes me right now.
Hmm.
Um, and it was about attention again and sort of the disposable nature of interaction, much in
Mhm.
line with this, obviously. And I asked them, I was like, does your phone make you a better person? Like, do you feel that this is helping you?
Mhm.
And I tell them, like, the answer is you're not going to gain or lose points based on your response. I'm just genuinely curious for you to
But
explain how you feel it does or doesn't help you. And it was interesting because I think on a micro level, they're all like, yes, this makes me better because I can do all these things. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, yes, but all the things that you're arguing that you can do are very clearly getting in your way in this space. Now, I have an agenda here, right? Like I want my space with them to
Mhm.
be productive and I want them to do what they're supposed to do.
Mhm.
But I'm wondering if Turkle's not operating at a similar remove
Hmm.
where, she has this perspective like, okay, you say that authenticity matters, but then I'm looking at
Hmm.
what you're doing. And from my lens, you're willing to settle.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if there's a different sort of
Mhm.
authenticity or different sort of perception of authenticity that comes into play here.
From whom though?
Well, like I guess I don't know how to explain this. I tried to explain this earlier. Like part of my concern here is have we become the curmudgeonly old people who are
Hmm.
now arguing that communication isn't what it used to be and that interpersonal relationships have suffered and that
Hmm. I
technology
see what
is
you're saying.
killing our ability to interact when in fact it has simply changed it and we haven't kept up.
Well, that's a good point. Can I hmm hmm you raised so many interesting things there in a row. I don't know where to go to, but let's address what you just said. You asked the question of are we, and by we, I think you don't just mean me and you mean Turkle.
Yeah,
Is she just being a
she can join our
curmudgeon?
party.
Is she being a curmudgeon? Is she being a curmudgeon and expecting us to do more? Is she urging us to accept more and not to settle?
Or is
Or
she clinging to an
okay,
outmoded
is she clinging to an outmoded? Well, I would say that if she is, I am as well to this extent. But I wouldn't call it curmudgeonly. I would say that I'm having a standard of value, and I'll give her this benefit of a doubt that she is judging the relationships from a standard of value. Now, that standard of value may be passe. Um, depends what I guess maybe it depends what you mean by curmudgeonly. Is it curmudgeonly because nobody's going to listen to you because you're making a particular kind of moral, basically a moral critique? Um, uh, maybe no one's going to listen to it. Is it outmoded? But that's not that doesn't
or
necessarily invalidate the moral critique, I
no,
guess is
or
what I'm
are we
saying.
not listening to you because we simply don't listen to anything anymore? Leave me a
Yeah, right,
text.
exactly, right. So to me, I don't know if if she is being her curmudgeon or if I'm being her curmudgeon. I think it's almost irrelevant. I think the real core would be, am I being a curmudgeon? Is she being a curmudgeon by the right thing? And okay, now I'm going to return to, I said I had a criticism of her,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to deliver it after I give a praise of her. So let me step back a moment. So and sort of engage where you very interestingly left us. Um, she's bringing a standard of value and bringing it into a new situation, a situation that she realized she's not stupid. She realizes that the technology human interface is changing and it's evolving. And she knows this is published in 2011, but she already knows that this is going to change even more radically in the years to come, right? And of course it has. So she is bringing a standard of value. I think she's basically bringing in a kind of humanistic value because I
Mm-hmm.
think she doesn't want to replace the human. Um, and I think she's nervous at all these moments when technology or philosophers of technology tell her, you have to leave behind the human. We're improving the human. And you have to move to this particular kind of platform because it's going to be better for you. It's better than human interaction. Um, she's clinging to a standard of value and saying, no, I think face-to-face communication is better than mediated communication, or at the very least, it can't wholly substitute. I don't think she would do. I think that's just Barry who might say that face-to-face communication is better than mediated communication. I wouldn't put that words in her mouth. I do think she feels that there's a very real danger, and I also would agree with her on this. There's a very real danger of simulacras of communication, of mediated communication becoming the whole of our communication. And Michael, I think that's what you were worried about when you see the students on the phone, right? They're not putting the phones down, which means for that moment at least, they refuse to engage in another form of communication besides the phone communication, besides that phone. They refuse to enter into another relationship besides the phone laptop relationship,
right?
A human relationship. Okay, so I think she's justified in doing that. I think that's I think she's worried that mediated communication is going to usurp this kind of face-to-face communication elements of where and therefore humans are going to lose values that I also would agree are values. What kinds of values? Spontaneity, innovation, improvisation. All these things matter in music. They matter in human relationships too. And usually improvisation, and in fact, this is the famous thing about improvisation. This is what Miles Davis learned in the famous quintet. Is what Herbie Hancock has this great story about being a quick digression with Herbie Hancock, because I promise to get back to Turkle. One of the great things about this is proof that Miles Davis was an improvising genius. In the quintet, Herbie Hancock has this great story. He's playing in the quintet. He plays a bad note. He plays a bum note. And then Herbie Hancock looks very nervously at Miles Davis for obvious reasons, thinking he's going to kick me out of the band. And then, of course, at first he thought, Herbie Hancock thinks, oh, maybe Miles didn't hear it. Of course, Miles heard it. He put his trumpet down. He looks at him, and he is giving him the Miles Davis stare. But and then Herbie just kept on playing and said, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm probably going to get fired. Then 10 seconds, Miles is all of a sudden playing in a different key. And then it took 5 minutes later, took 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes later in the improvisation. And then Herbie figured out what happened. Miles heard the mistake, didn't expect it, made a correction, and then turned the mistake into the building blocks for a new improvisation. So I mentioned this because, when we talk about the differences between human communication or direct communication and mediated communication, that sounds really abstract, but I mean, that story. And when you think about musical performance, you can really see, these things matter. If you have something that is totally algorithm, what you lose is improvisation, and what you lose is the possibility of failure. But failure is a building block of improvisation and innovation. Okay, so I like this part of Turkle. Now because I've been talking too long, let me mention my critique. But it also has to do with what you're saying, which you said earlier. There are points in Turkle where she is talking about, what was the example you gave about imitation, that we imitate something, Michael? Because that's what I want to return to.
Oh God,
you remember this earlier? You were saying something. There was something that we see this and we want to imitate it, and she doesn't like that. I can't remember your specific example. It's okay. Let me give my general charge, and maybe we'll think about the specific example that prompted it. I'll give my criticism of the structure of a lot of Turkle's arguments. And here's the structure. A lot of times she will note that humans will, and I think we were talking about this in relation to humans settling for the technological simulacra, right? And settling for it. And she's irked by that. Here's the problem with that. We are all imitation. Everything about us is imitation. If you say, I'm going to save the human, but I want to save a human who does more than imitate machines. Or rather, I think I remember the example now. I think we're talking about the examples of computers. I think you were talking about the example of computers or technology that imitates us. Because they imitate us, they improve, right? And she's saying, well, that improvement is not real improvement. Got a real problem with that. Because I think the real problem that I have, it isn't that I have a problem with her. I guess I have a complaint about the human species. What do we do without imitation? Everything we do is we're imitating something, whether it's language, whether it's music, whether it's dialogue, whether it's whatever, any kind of learning, any kind of initiation process requires imitation of a model. And in a way, she kind of wants to break out of the stalemate of the human technology stalemate. She kind of wants to break on through by saying, well, humans are more than what they imitate. But
so I think
are we?
I think that's fair. Then the question I think I would ask you is, where does and this is a philosophical question here, right? But where would you then place the distinction between, like, when does the algorithm overlap the human? And her answer to that seemed to be the awareness that you are a part of a life cycle and that you will die.
Death.
And that you will end.
Right.
And that and so in a way, to go back to the imitation, right? The awareness that there is a finish line, there is an end point, will prompt you, in theory, to at some point do more than imitate, to evolve from that imitation, much like your jazz example, right? Like, okay, so we're good. Oh, here's the glitch in the machine.
Now let's imitate it and
now we have to play with, we have to do something new,
different,
as opposed to correct it. And so, this to me gets me back to the question again of emotional authenticity. And her argument about that is that machines are unable to do that because it's all math, right? That
but we're not able to. Okay, you hit it. I don't think we're able to do it either. That's the problem. That's why we're in a stalemate.
Okay, you got it.
I don't think I wouldn't know an authentic emotion if it hit me. And I don't think you would either. That's the problem. That's our human problem.
So this gets us to the Turing test, right? This idea
exactly
about being fooled.
Right.
So does it matter?
That's my problem. That's my problem. And that's my problem. That's our problem. That's Turkle's problem. She wants us to come up with an authentic thing that's going to deliver us from the machine. I'm with her on all her critiques of how we're deifying or putting too much emphasis on technology. I'm with her on this idea that it's a dangerous thing to only go to be sufficiently to find all mediation all the time a sufficient way to be human. I'm with her. But then she says, I want us to be authentic. And eventually we'll get to the authentic, and Mr. Robot or Ms. Robot or them robot will not be able to get the authentic. Not so fast there, Sherry. I don't think that's possible. For the very simple reason, I can't get there and you can't get there either.
Well, see,
and our listeners can't.
Now, this is fascinating because this also gets us, but like, she starts it out with the discussion about going to the nature exhibit where they had the tortoises from the Galapagos Islands who just sat there. And her daughter says, man, they should have just used robots, right? Robots would be more interesting.
I agree with her. This is my point. I agree with the kid. I agree with her daughter.
So this gets us to, admittedly, the creepiest thing that I've read recently, which was her discussion about an interview that was done with a reporter regarding sex with robots. right?
We were going to get here no matter what,
It just
right?
had to
Okay,
happen.
now we know we're at
And
the end of the
you know,
podcast, everyone.
so yeah, thanks for listening. And she's opposed to it because it's not emotionally.
Exactly. What?
Like,
So
I
I
feel
haven't read
so
this article.
uncomfortable.
Well, but wait
But
a minute. Wait a minute. Wait. I haven't. So I haven't read this article. This is not meant to be a prurient question. It's just a. Nor am I trying to slam her. But on what basis? Doesn't she have to say that there's a kind of unique human love or a human emotion?
well, I think that's what she's going for. Right. And I don't know that it's
Mhm.
unique. And this is what gets complicated. I don't think it's a unique human love. I think the argument, or a unique human emotion, I think the
Yeah.
argument is that artificial intelligence or robots
Mhm.
simply aren't capable of any sort
Of emotion.
of emotion, that they are. And this is okay. And this is
Okay, all
where
right, all right, all right. So
this
so
is where I have
we
problems
feel an
because,
authentic emotion. So again, you're postulating, she's postulating
right.
that I have an authentic emotion and you have an authentic emotion, and robots aren't even capable of emotion. They're just sort of the simulacra of emotion.
Mhm.
Okay.
And that's the opposition, right? Like, that's why this is sort of a creepy thing,
Mhm.
because it's not, there's you can't have an emotional connection. And then this gets the question, well, if I think I connected with something,
Right.
can you tell me I'm wrong because it was a toaster the whole time?
And I guess I'm at this point. At that point, I think that she can't. I think that person who brings up that objection, Michael, tell me I'm wrong, but that person who brings up that objection, but I feel that way. I remember that passage in the book, one passage in the book where she says, "Well, feelings aren't enough." That's true. That's true. Certainly in terms, if we're doing moral and philosophy, I can certainly see that. I can see an objection being made to me basing my actions on my feelings. I totally get that. But if that person does have that moment of connection, I don't know, and it's a simulacra of it's if the objection to that is, oh no, it's not the real thing, it just looks that way. I don't know I sympathize with the cynic. I don't know, the cynic, whether you call him the cynic or the realist, who just says, well, it looks that way to me. I don't know if Turkle has an objection to that.
See, I think what's fascinating about this, to try and sort of find shore here, right?
Yeah.
What's fascinating about this is, if you extend this argument just a little bit, right? Well, what constitutes an authentic emotion? Well, what constitutes, um, a quote unquote legitimate connection? We get into really, really murky waters
That's what I
with
think.
what our technologies are doing. And so, to go back to McLuhan again, and this
Mhm.
is, I buckle up. I mean, we're making some sharp turns here, but
Okay,
right.
all right.
If McLuhan argued that the medium is the mass age, or the medium is the message, if the medium is now artificial intelligence, or
Mhm.
the medium is robotics with just technologies that, let me restate it. If the medium now are technologies with which we can have interactions that appear to be meaningful,
Right.
right? We're really hinging on this question of what's real
Mhm.
in some sort of undefined way. Like, I still haven't got a clear handle on what constitutes the real,
Exactly.
because you need a third party for this now,
I think you
right?
do. Right,
Um,
right.
because I feel it's real. My toaster's not telling me that it's not real. So now, who
I
gets
agree.
to be the arbiter of
Exactly.
authenticity in this?
Not Sherry Turkle. That
So, so
you said
what?
much more compactly. You said much more compactly what I was trying to say a couple moments ago. So I just wanted to underscore it. What you said right there is what I was struggling to say a couple minutes ago, which is just simply that Turkle gets in very muddy, murky waters. That was the term you used. She gets in murky waters when she has to make these claims that that, oh, no, this is real, not what you think it is, but
Now
this is
here's a
real.
question for you. Here's a question for
And
you.
you need a third person, exactly as you said. So I just wanted to underscore that because you said
Now,
it so
to
much
be
more beautifully than I did. Yeah.
but to be fair to Miss
Okay.
Turkle, because
Yeah.
I'm a fan.
I thought you were going to go to McLuhan, or don't you want to go to that?
Well, okay, so if the medium is the message,
Yes, sir.
right? What and this is the medium,
Yeah.
right? And this is not a quick answer here, but you've said, okay, so prior to this technological leap that we're sort of in the middle of now, technologies were an extension, right?
McLuhan's thing. Yeah,
Now,
McLuhan mentions that.
yes. Now technologies are a substitution, which is both ubiquitous,
Indeed.
oftentimes inferior in terms
But
of,
convenient, often convenient.
but because of its incredible convenience, it's preferable.
Yeah, right.
So, like, what's the takeaway from that? And then to sort of follow that up, Turkle writes this in 2011. Here we are on the dawn of 24. I really wonder how she would write this now. Would she still, because I don't think that you and I are the first to ask these questions, and I don't think that you and I are the first to look at this
Yes,
work
we
and say,
are.
obviously,
I'm sorry, clearly.
we should have
Yeah.
recorded this
Yes, sir.
2 days ago, and then we could have been the first ones to do it this year. But it's an interesting question, I think, to think about. Well, what would she say now? Because this was still fairly primitive.
Sure. And now the robotic intelligence, the artificial intelligence that she was describing in fairly nascent stages,
yes,
actually, now is really, really, really advanced. So do you want to answer your question? Your question's fascinating.
I don't have an answer for my question. I was hoping that, like, what's the message? I think that she, alone together, I think that the message is that we are grasping and drowning. And I think that we're satisfied to grasp and drown because there's new shiny objects to grasp for. And I don't think that we feel that drowning is ultimately all that bad.
Right. Okay.
That sounds wickedly
No,
cynical.
no. This sounds wickedly what?
Cynical.
Well, I don't know. I feel that we're approaching closure here. Do I have a okay? If we're approaching closure, let me return to what you said, and I'll say two things and try to keep it brief. You were asking the question about what would Turkle say. I think Turkle, what would Turkle say of our particular predicament? I think you answered it. I think your description of what you called the cynical description of the current reality, that we seem even more subservient or more complacent about the technologization of everything. I don't see any way of avoiding that particular kind of conclusion. Now, I want to end, though, with a kind of defensive. That sounds like she was sort of holding up her hands in 2011 saying, please stop this train. And now she would have to admit the train has, gone even further down the tracks. And Sherry Turkle is a failure, and we're all failures. So, and maybe that's why you were calling what you said cynical. But I'll mention a positive thing here that I think that Turkle was already sort of articulating in 2011, and it's weak. It's literally, it's not a strong thing. She's not confident in this claim, but it is her closing claim. She really believes that it's possible for humans to opt out of certain situations. Now, certainly in the last 15 years, we've seen very, very little opting out. But I would say, and my conclusion here, but I would say that the opting out that she was pointing to in 2011 is still possible in 2024. Am I advocating a complete media fast? No. Would I think, do I think it's a good idea for everyone to put down their devices, especially in certain situations? Yes, 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 I do. So far, it's not illegal to do that. And I think the only way, and okay, so I guess I end positively, not just in Turkle, but actually I kind of want to bring back Marshall McLuhan. I do think that a way to go forward, and I think Turkle would find this somewhat sympathetic. Um, I've been arguing throughout, and I think we've been arguing throughout that we've sort of moved past the McLuhan-esque paradigm where technology is a mere extension of our bodies and a mere extension of the human, and that we moved into some other realm. I would think that a recovery of the old world McLuhan, this idea that that technology has to be human sized. I don't know. I think that's still important. It's still an important message.
See, I want to
And that
agree with you.
insofar as one can, now, am I saying let's blow up the internet? No. Am I even going to get rid of my laptop? No, I'm not. Am I going to get rid of Spotify? I don't really feel the need to. But am I going to question how I use it? Am I going to question how much? Yeah, I should. If I don't, I should.
But so again, we're talking about sort of one-sided value judgments here. I mean, what I think is interesting is in 2011, she's saying, there is now this uprising of resistance and people are trying to opt out and kids are saying, I just want real conversations. I mean, she makes the argument at the end of the book that there is a pushback against the youth or by the youth against the technologies for some sort of more human centric interaction.
Have you seen that though?
Well, I hear it. You hear about a lot of people who are going to quit Facebook, and you'll look at these
They don't
people
though.
and they'll say,
They
no,
don't.
they will. They'll say, I
They
don't
will.
have Facebook, as they bury their head in their phone
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
with
I
something
think
else.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and so
I don't want to interrupt you.
no, that is my point. I think that like, it's like I mean, I don't mean to sound overly dramatic here, but it's like the cancer that's just taken hold.
Well, I don't think that's it. I don't think you're exaggerating that. And that's what I'm saying. What I'm talking about is a solution, is a very weak solution. Turkle's solution is weak. But I think that's all you have. That's all I have. And I think that's
Yeah.
all we collectively have. I do think the situation is dire, but but it's not dire enough that you can't make changes in your own life when you feel you need them.
Well,
So,
so
and I think that's our only. I mean, that's the bright light. If you're saying, well, that's not very bright,
well, is that the
I
bright
don't
light or
think it
is
is very bright. I don't think it is. I think it's realistic. I mean,
yeah,
realistically, it's not very bright, but I think it's all we got.
is it that or do we just hope that maybe falling in love? I don't know. This must say something about me
Falling
because
in
everything
love.
I'm talking about is a
Are
kitchen
we going to go
appliance.
back to the robot sex again? Is
No, I don't
that
want to go
why?
back. Yes, but no. Like just the emotional connection. Like, does it need to be authentic to matter? I wonder if maybe we're just, you and I are just stuck in 2011, yelling at all the
I don't need,
like. Does it
but
matter?
well, I'll tell you what does matter. Let's bracket off love for a moment. I think it does matter where, and maybe it doesn't matter in the cosmic sense, but my ability to pay attention to
That's it.
things matters a whole F of a whole lot to me.
That's true.
Okay, so let's bracket off whether or not that's authentic or whether love is more
So this is
authentic.
about attention.
I think this is fundamentally about mental states and cognitive states, and not just emotional states, but cognitive states. And it's about attention. And I think if I lose the quality of my attention, I lose what matters to me. And so I mean, I don't have to make it to be a conversation about love for me to get very passionate about it, for me to feel there's something really at stake.
I think
Something
that's
worth
right.
defending. Something worth defending.
I don't mean to be flippant. That feels right to me.
It feels right to you,
So-
I'm sure. I'm
Oh,
sure it
geez.
feels right to you, Falk.
So it must be right. Are we good?
I don't know. No, we're not good. Of course, we're
I
not good.
all right. Barry, with deep feeling, I thank you for an interesting conversation.
With deep, authentic love, Michael. I sign off tonight.
I sign off, Barry.
All right.
Have
Sounds
a good,
good,
have a
Michael.
good, we'll do
A lot
this
of
again
fun.
soon. All right.
We'll do this again soon. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.